Welcome back to Kings of the North. Doug Lesmerises and Bill Landis. We're going to talk about coaches today. It's our latest region in our bracket of most important Northern people for the 2025 college football season. Landis, we have done quarterbacks. Should I say who won, or is that giving it away to people who maybe don't keep up on KOTN?
No, I think it's okay to say who won. Yeah,
Jalen Daniels won. Kansas quarterback Jalen Daniels won. Then we did offensive players, non-quarterback edition. And who won that?
Jeremiah Smith, Ohio State receiver.
Ohio State receiver. So coaches today, which means on the Wednesday show, we're going Tuesday, Wednesday this week again. We appreciate everybody bearing with us. We're just maneuvering around spring football. We're maneuvering around some things in our life. I mean, one of the things that's happening is my daughter, who is a senior in high school, is like making her college decision, and we have some colleges to see. So like that's happening right now. It's a once in a lifetime thing. We're in Columbus. Ohio State has spring practice. So thank you for bearing with us. Coaches today, defensive players Wednesday, and then we will get our final four. Also, Penn State starts spring practice today. I think James Franklin's going to be talking to the folks today. I want to have a James Franklin conversation here because this is the time, Landis. I'm curious if a natty or bust conversation, one that certainly happened around Ohio State last season, started by Ohio State players. If that happens around Penn State this year, I don't love the natty or bust conversation, but I also think natty or bust probably might be more applicable to Penn State this year than it was Ohio State last year because of the bust part of it. That like when you truly are peaking to a peak, it's like, okay, like if not now, when conversation. And it's just semantics. We all know how much talent Penn State has. We all know how good their coaching staff is. We all know the guys who stayed. It's just the semantics we put on it. But I'm curious what kind of semantics the Penn State program itself will put on it or forcefully try to not have it put on it by other people.
I have no idea what to expect. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what the environment around that program all year will be like. It's very different from Ohio State, as you said. Like, Penn State does not carry the year in, year out expectations of competing for a national title that Ohio State does. So the bust that definitely seemed less applicable to Ohio State than it does in this particular case with Penn State. But Penn State has also, I think, over the last 5-6 years, sort of been defined by perhaps outsized expectations. And I don't know if it's healthy for a program like that to live in an natty or bust world, but there's no doubt gearing up for it. It's going to create a lot of pressure, I think, around that program, whether they name it or not. There's going to be a lot of pressure around that program this year for sure.
It's not a situation. If we don't name the pressure, it's gone. If you don't name it, that's like a he who shall not be named. Like if you don't say the name, if you go 10-2, nobody cares. We didn't say it. That's how it works. But I'm curious to see. I mean, in the end, Ohio State sort of like said it. Then I think tried to escape it. Then I think very clearly were impacted by it. Then achieved it. Like the natty or bust for Ohio State last year was interwoven into every part of their season. Was it not?
It hovered over everything. It put the team in a weird, under kind of a different, even for a team that carries incredibly lofty expectations every single year, and rightfully so. It put that particular team under a different kind of microscope. Because I think part of it was just sort of waiting to catch them in the lie. Not lie is probably not the right word, but it's you put this out there for once it wasn't the media putting this on you or anybody else putting this on you. You put this on yourself. Good luck living up to the standard. But they did. So I guess they get the last laugh in that regard.
Yeah. Yeah. But I do think maybe it affected them during the course of the year. That I'm not saying that's why Ohio State lost to Michigan, but I felt like they were, you could feel them trying to navigate it. I think at times, not just we're good, we have good players, let's play.
I think they try to navigate it both emotionally, dealing with those expectations week in and week out, but then also tactically they played different because they wanted to win a national title. and knew what this like little sliver of what their roster was for this little snapshot in time like kind of meant, because it was very different to just be sort of as old and experienced as Ohio State was last year too. So it changed a lot of things about Ohio State season. Actually, some of it perhaps for the better, because I think they learned something about how to go through a season winning a national title. But I don't know if the emotional component was always great for everybody.
That's very well said by you, because I do think the credit they get for having Natty in their head. It's like they said that we started at game 16 and worked our way back.
Mm-hmm.
You have to embrace the Natty side of Natty or bust to think that way. Yes. So actually, you should embrace Natty. Penn State this year, I think, should think that way. Now, but you must embrace the Natty and navigate the bust. I think so. There's an or in between there. So it's one phrase, but it's really two different things.
Yeah.
So you're hitting on that navigating, like embracing the Natty is actually Natty and navigate. It's smart. You said it. You said it smart way. You said that. That's it. James Franklin. But I think so for Penn State to Penn State be like James Franklin is Mr. as much as any coach is Mr. like on to the next game, 1-0. We're on. All we think about is Indiana, right? What does he say? What's the thing? Hashtag only our next opponent. Like he
hashtags that whoever team they're playing like 50 times in one tweet, and then I think puts 1-0 at the end of it. Yeah. Week.
Great. You can't actually think that way this year if you're Penn State. You can't. You need. No. You publicly, you can say it so your players don't get freaked out by pressure, but that's actually not. And I'm assuming that's not actually what James Franklin does. Like if you said to James Franklin, do you know when the national championship game is? I don't think he'd be like, no, I don't even know. Is there one? He can't actually think that way. You have to plan for it. If you're this talented, and it is a privilege to be as talented as Penn State is this year, you must plan for it. Plan for the Natty, navigate the bust. All right, we'll talk about that more in the middle of the show.
That's actually a good question for James Franklin, I would think, though, because like in the aftermath of Ohio State winning its national championship, they put out all these videos of it like going through the season, what the journey was like. But it started with Ryan Day in the first team meeting of the 2024 season, telling them what day the national championship game was. Like, I wonder if that's how James Franklin started this 2025 season for Penn State, because I absolutely think that he should.
He should. We agree he should.
Sure. Yeah.
Do we think he did?
I don't know.
That's why we're having a half an hour James Franklin conversation in the middle of this show. I got all kinds of reference points on James Franklin for this show. I got Jim Harbaugh reference points. I got Terry Donahue and Gary Patterson and Pat Dye reference points for James Franklin. We have a lot of stuff to talk about. We're also going to talk about the Maryland AD moving on. We're going to talk about the Georgia arrests, which we have not talked about yet. And we're going to talk about the Matt Weiss, Michigan situation and federal charges, and Michigan as a university also now being sued as part of this. Like, we haven't talked about that. We're going to talk about that. First, the bracket. This is the bracket that I did. The way we did this, we said we're going to have 4 regions, 4 16-person brackets. Landis will make 2. I'll make 2. We won't reveal it to each other until the show. So I did quarterbacks and coaches because I'm the dumber one, and you did the more difficult one, which is offensive non-quarterbacks and defensive players. This is head coaches and assistants. So it's your coaching, how much your individual coaching can and will affect this college football season from a Northern perspective. So it's the excellence, how excellent your team could be, how much that could matter, the influence that you have, like if you're good or not so good at your job, how much that could matter. So we get it. You understand. Are you ready for this, Landis, to reveal the bracket? Then what we do, we go through the matchup ourselves. We say who we think we should win, who we think should win each matchup to get a champion of this region. And if the people watching on the Facebook, on the YouTube Live want to help out in that process, we certainly invite them to. Let's get to the, you ready?
Let's do it. Yeah, I'm excited.
Right. Guess who the 1 seed is?
I bet it's James Franklin.
It's James Franklin. Now, doesn't mean he's going to win, but I didn't have a lot of trouble making James Franklin the 1 seed here. Do you agree with that?
Absolutely. Yes. Oh man, I see what you did there with his coordinators too.
See what I did? Oh yeah, you do.
Yeah. I think yes, this may have been maybe the most clear number 1 seed we've had in all 4 of our regions.
Okay. So I'll just run through all the seeds real quick and then we'll get to the matchups, okay?
Mm-hmm.
The 1 seed is James Franklin, Penn State head coach. The 2 seed is Brian Hartline, Ohio State offensive coordinator and play caller. Play caller, that's the big deal there. Number 3 seed is Jason Beck, the new Utah offensive coordinator. The 4 seed is Chris Ash, the new Notre Dame defensive coordinator. So Beck and Ash are new to jobs. Big deal how good they can be. Beck reshaping Utah, Ash trying to keep something going at Notre Dame after Al Golden left. The 5 seed is Dan Lanning, which is like, let's not forget about Dan Lanning. And that, like, we think he did a lot well, but then when it came down to at the end, like, Oregon got blown off the field by the eventual national champ. So, like, Dan Lanning has something I think to show us. The 6 seed is new, also the new Michigan offensive coordinator Chip Lindsey. The 7 seed is Brett Bielema, head coach of Illinois. How good can they be? The 8, 9, yeah, I did it. Jim Knowles, Penn State defensive coordinator. Andy Koltelnicki, Penn State offensive coordinator. We're going to decide in the first round which Penn State coordinator matters more. And then in the second round, they might face their head coach. The 10 seed is new head coach at West Virginia, Rich Rodriguez. Can the Mountaineers get back on their feet? The 11 seed, Matt Wells, offensive coordinator at Kansas State. We think Kansas State has a very good chance to win the Big 12. But Matt Wells, who was there last year, now is going to call plays this year. Like, can he do it? The 12 seed, Jeff Nixon, stayed as the Syracuse OC. Can they keep this going without Kyle McCord and Aronde Gadsden and LaQuint Allen, all the guys they lost? The 13 seed, Luke Fickell. Hey, is Wisconsin going to be good, or is Luke Fickell going to be on his way out? The 14 seed, Dana Holgerson, the Nebraska offensive coordinator, hired at the end of last year, full play caller, full control of that Nebraska offense with Dylan Raiola this year. 15, Lance Leipold. Hey, by the way, he's a good coach. Can Kansas be good? And the 16 seed Purdue head coach Barry Odom. What do you think of my seeds? What do you think of my people?
Yeah, good selection of people. I feel like I'm looking at some upsets. I don't think we've had
then.
We did have a 10 seed, I guess, win the quarterback bracket, but the offensive player bracket ended up being kind of chalky. I don't know that this one will be. Just looking at the way you have it laid out.
Let's do it then. All right. 1 versus 16. The first matchup is James Franklin versus Barry Odom. We are going to talk about James Franklin and what's going to happen at Penn State in the middle of the show, regardless of whether James Franklin wins this bracket or not. I don't know that we need to say a lot about, I mean, we get it. Barry Odom, like, if Purdue can be good, Purdue has been good. Like, I feel like Purdue it's like kind of one of those programs where if their coach is really good, they can be quite good. And if their coach is not good, there's not a talent depth that's going to prop them up regardless. Right. So like Joe Tiller back in the day is like, hey, Joe Tiller's really good at this. And then it's like Danny Hope was kind of, and then Daryl Hazel didn't work. But then Jeff Brom was like, hey, they made a Big Ten championship game with Jeff Brom. And then Ryan Walters, like the hire at the time, didn't work. Like, I think Barry Odom, like, there's some things at some programs kind of like there's a ceiling or a floor regardless. I feel like the head coach has a great effect on ceiling and floor at Purdue.
The head coach does. And also, if Barry Odom is successful, then he will, I guess, demonstrate an ability for that program to be good in a different way, because when Purdue has been good, at least in my lifetime, it's been like fun, funky, aggressive, exotic, pushing the envelope offense. And that's not what Barry Odom is, nor did he like kind of go out and hire like an OC that's going to run something like he ran the go-go offense with Brennan Marion at UNLV. He didn't bring Brennan Marion with him to Purdue. Brennan Marion's the head coach at Sacramento State. I think he hired from USC, I think is his offensive coordinator. Yeah. So that'll be interesting to see. Like it's a bit of an experiment, I think, to see if Purdue can be a successful program in a different way than it has been in the past. And I can't say that I'm super confident that it will demonstrate that ability, but I'm eager to watch it kind of play out. Barry Odom, I think, is like a very good football coach. I just don't know if there's like a specific type of coach you need at Purdue to be successful, and whether or not Barry Odom is actually cut from that cloth.
Yeah, and listen, like Jeff Brom wasn't awesome every year, Jeff Brom 7-6, 6-7, 4-8, 2-4, but then 9-4 and 8-6 in his final 2 years. Like Ryan Walters just didn't work. Like if Barry Odom doesn't work, Purdue has a chance to like vanish, like be lost. Steven's in the chat saying send them to the MAC. Like he says Purdue's dead. I don't think Purdue's dead, but I don't think Purdue can withstand like 3 bad hires in a row. Like Ryan Walters didn't work out, 2 years and out. Barry Odom, it's like, 3 years of Barry Odom. This didn't really work. Let's go on to the new guy. That could be horrible. That could be a death knell for Purdue football.
Yep. In a new Big Ten while your in-state rival is ascending. Yeah, not a great spot for Purdue to be in if that's what happens.
So I think Barry Odom beats James Franklin here. I think we just made a great case for Barry Odom. Is that what we just did there?
Barry Odom holds the fate of the Purdue football program in his hands. I mean, it's a pretty good argument, but I think I still go James Franklin. I
mean, James Franklin's just trying to win one national title for a traditional blue blood. If Barry Odom doesn't work, Purdue's going to drop football. Okay, I guess James Franklin, but I'm putting this on you. If Purdue drops football in 4 years, we'll look back on this and say, we can't believe we kicked Barry Odom out in the first round. All right, James Franklin advances. Is this diabolical by me? Is it stupid? Jim Knowles versus Andy Koltelnicki. As soon as we said we were doing this, I was like, I got my 8-9. I got my 1 seed and I got my 8-9 seeds. What do you think of this Jim Knowles, Andy Koltelnicki in the house Penn State coordinator matchup?
So I think it's fun. I'm glad you did it, but also the winner is quite clear for me. Because we discussed when Penn State hired Jim Knowles. So Jim Knowles goes to Penn State, is now the highest paid coordinator in college football, right? And there's a lot of attention that comes with that. But Penn State's defense has been good for multiple years over multiple coordinators. Like if Jim Knowles is good, all that is sort of business as usual for Penn State. The difference would be whether or not they are good offensively, which like that. So that to me is an easy win almost for Andy Koltelnicki. I like that you put them together. I actually don't know. There's a world where there are matchups where I would pick Jim Knowles to win, but I actually don't view Jim Knowles as like a super compelling character in this exercise because of interesting. And it's a credit to Penn State's defensive track record under multiple coordinators. It has nothing to like. I think Jim Knowles is very good, but he's simply like taking an already good defense and is entrusted to keep it good. Whereas Andy Koltelnicki has to take an offense that was sort of lost for a little bit and took steps forward last year, but I think also needs to be, somewhat significantly better this year if Penn State wants to win a national title.
I think that's a compelling case. When Jim Knowles came to Ohio State, he was coming to fix Ohio State's defense. He is not going to fix Penn State's defense. And like Manny Diaz, Tom Allen, Jim Knowles is getting more money and Jim Knowles is really good, but like Tom Allen and Manny Diaz were really good. And I do think this, like, we have some interesting comments in the chat. It's like, what Knowles has to do in year one, but no, it's one of those things. It happens every single time. And goobers like me fall for it every single time. You think, this is it. Year one, this guy better do it. And then no coach ever fully institutes his deal in year one. And then in year two, they're better. And in year two, all they talk about is like, hey, in year one, I mean, it happened with Jim Knowles at Ohio State. It's like all we were doing in year one is like trying to teach guys what to do. And then like, it's the basics. It's like you're not even conjugating verbs yet. You're just doing the basics of learning this new language. And then like in year two, it's like you actually can start speaking the language and flowing and playing without being like a robot. So we're not going to get the fully formed Jim Knowles version of his best defense, but they have good defensive players. And can he put those good defensive players in position to succeed? Yeah, probably. Yeah, I'm sure he can. Will it be the best version of Jim Knowles? No. Will it be an excellent Penn State defense? Almost certainly yes. But Andy Koltelnicki in year two, now they're all speaking the language together, right? And this is the difference of if Koltelnicki had taken a head coaching job and you only got 1 year of him versus like, okay, if you thought Drew Aller and an Andy Koltelnicki offense in year one of that was an improvement, wait till you see year two. And he has the offensive line, and he has a dynamic young tight end, and he has 2 great running backs, and he has some new receivers to work with. Like, you're right. It's not close because how big of a leap should we expect from an Andy Kotelnicki offense in year 2 at Penn State when they are returning the quarterback as well?
I think fairly large, right? And not only are they returning the quarterback with the expectation to be better, he also has to find a different way to build it because the player that he built the entire offense around last year is gone. Tyler Warren's going to the NFL, right? So like that just, I think, makes Andy Kotelnicki's job all that more difficult, but it doesn't lessen the expectations. So I think he's in a pretty tough, not a tough spot, but like a spot that's going to come with, I think, a fairly high level of scrutiny. Because I think Penn State, in my opinion, has played championship defense for 4 years. But they've been top 10 defense every year the last 4 years if you go by the FEI defensive ratings. And there's like, I think by scoring, they're maybe even better than that. They've not been that on offense. They were much better on offense last year than they have been the last couple when James Franklin was cycling through a bunch of offensive coordinators. But I don't know that like simply improving off of what had been gives Andy Kotelnicki like a major benefit of the doubt. I think whether or not Penn State wins a national title this year, we'll get to the matchup. I think hinges more on James Franklin than it does Andy Kotelnicki, but there's a lot of burden being carried there by Andy Kotelnicki and what that offense can do.
Okay. All right. We'll go Andy Kotelnicki. Steven in the chat is now convinced from our conversation that it's Jim Knowles. And I think the chances of like Penn State defense being like bad or like non-existent, and they don't need it to be a lot better. I think like the bigger thing, if they had not hired Jim Knowles, if they had promoted Anthony Poindexter to call the defense, he's the co-DC there. Everybody likes him there, but he'd never had been like a defensive coordinator like this on this stage. If they had promoted him, I think we could make the case then of like, okay, like Anthony Poindexter, who hasn't really maybe quite done this before, is being put in a position to maintain this Penn State defensive excellence. But Jim Knowles has done this before. So
that's the thing
which
for
is
me.
part of why they paid him the money.
I think the only way you say this is Jim Knowles here is if you think what he's done in his last 2 stops was like misleading in some kind of way. He built one of the best defenses in the country at Oklahoma State, and then had the best defense in the country at Ohio State and won a national championship. Right. So like I just think he's good and has good defensive players, and the defense will be good. And it doesn't have to be, I don't think it has to be number 1. I just think it can't be worse than what it has been. But I don't really believe that it will, even though they are losing some important players. Abdul Carter, not the least of them.
All right. We'll advance Andy Kotelnicki of the OC. All right. So what's up next, Mike? I need to look at the graphic again. Oh, 413. Old friends. I didn't even do this on purpose.
Co-workers, co-coordinators.
Former co-coordinators. Notre Dame defensive coordinator Chris Ash against Wisconsin head coach Luke Fickell. They were co-coordinators on Ohio State's 2014 national championship team. And here they are going head-to-head in the first round. Landis, what do you think?
I'm spelling upset here. I think Luke Fickell's a little underseeded. Maybe a lot underseeded. Just because of I viewed Wisconsin as a program, and I'm not alone in this. Like I viewed Wisconsin as a program that should be operating in that second tier of the Big Ten, should be like hovering around the door, if not knocking on the door, to get into the playoff in this expanded playoff era. And they just fell off so dramatically, so quickly under Luke Fickell's leadership that, like, Wisconsin's not in the same position as Purdue, but relative to expectations, like there's a real opportunity for Wisconsin to just cede a ton of ground. And Luke Fickell like needs to have the best year I think he's had as a coach to ensure that that doesn't happen to the Badgers this year. Otherwise, I think he's out of a job and Wisconsin's starting all over again.
I think Notre Dame is a real national title contender. And I think what we are talking about that didn't happen at Penn State at defensive coordinator kind of is happening at Notre Dame at defensive coordinator. Because by the Brian Fremeau index, actually, Notre Dame had the number 1 defense last year. Ohio State was 2. Penn State, I think, was 4. Penn State was 4. So that's what we're talking about, how good the Notre Dame defense was with Al Golden as the defensive coordinator. Now, if part of your argument is, well, Marcus Freeman is the head coach. He's a defensive head coach, and the coordinator on the same side of the ball as the head coach always matters a little bit less. I think that's reasonable to work that into the conversation. But Chris Ash is not Jim Knowles. Chris Ash has been kind of bouncing around and is not like once upon a time was a very established, very good defensive coordinator at Wisconsin, at Arkansas, at Ohio State, but is not bringing in the profile of Knowles now. Does Notre Dame hiring Chris Ash feel like somewhat of a risk to you?
Yes, it does a little bit. It reminds me. It's not a good straight comparison because Chris Ash has been a successful college coordinator, but like Ryan Day, when he got the Ohio State job, I think like initially made great defensive coordinator hire, but he only had it for a year. Then he had to make a change. When he had to make that change, he whiffed. And so Marcus Freeman, I think made a great hire hiring Al Golden to be his DC. And now he's got to prove that he can do the thing that I think great head coaches that are continually national title contenders do, which is make the correct hire every single time for your coordinator positions. Because he even we've seen on the offensive side of the ball, like when he lost Tommy Reese, he whiffed. And they were bad. And they had to reset and they got Mike Denbrock and it worked out okay, but they were lost for a year without a good OC. So there's the opportunity for that to happen with this and Chris Ash bringing him back to college after a few years away from it. But I think the impact of that would be lessened by the fact that Marcus Freeman is a defensive coordinator himself. So like if anything were to go awry, he can just kind of grab it and maybe point it in a better direction.
Could Chris Ash derail Notre Dame's national title hopes?
I think it's possible. Yeah.
So like that to me is like, why is Chris Ash the 4 seed? Because I think Notre Dame is a very legit national title contender, and they hired a defensive coordinator who hasn't been a coordinator since 2020 at Texas and had been a scout for the Jaguars, and kind of since bombing out as the Rutgers head coach has really bounced around. And that is incredibly impactful to me. It's like, well, I mean, like they figured out the quarterback stuff, and they got good running back play, and their offensive line was deep, and their receivers stepped up. And yeah, they missed Xavier Watts a little, but the young corners who were back and more experienced, they were really good. But the scheme, defensive, they just didn't have a good plan. They over blitzed. They made bad decisions. They got caught in bad coverages, and that's why Notre Dame lost in the first round of the playoff, because like they got out coached. That's huge to me. So Fickell might be underseeded here, but man, I think Chris Ash matters. But also, so like make your Fickell case again. Like here, so the difference between, do you think there is like whoa, Billy Edwards settled it down, like they figured out who they are again? Like Wisconsin's back and competing at the edge of the playoff race all year, and there's no doubt about it. Fickell's the dude. It's morning again in Madison. Woo! Versus, that's it. He's out after 3 years. What a miss. Do you think both those are on the table?
I think they're both on the table, and I think it would really set Wisconsin back if that were the case. Because I don't know that Wisconsin is a place that is going to like say like it doesn't go right for Luke Fickell this year and they get rid of him and they bring in a new head coach. Like, are you going to be able to attract the transfer portal talent that would then flip your roster fast enough for you to get right back on track immediately in a place like Wisconsin? I don't know the answer to that. So like another down year for Luke Fickell, I just feel like might spiral into something pretty bad for Wisconsin football.
Okay.
If that were to happen.
And I also he's so established. He had such a good resume for Wisconsin. This is their swing. I also don't know that it's like, I don't know that he would necessarily be 3 years and out for sure. Then it's like, okay, now you're going into year 4. Like,
if they have another losing season, you think there's a world where they keep him?
I mean, if they go 3-9, probably not. But if
so
they're
call it
like
5-7.
If they're 5-7, I don't think it's 1,000% guaranteed, unless like all the season ticket and all the donors are like, I'm never going to a Wisconsin game again. This is horrible. But if it's sort of like, they had a tough schedule again, like you maybe like you went to Danny O'Neal halfway through the season and you can see some flashes there and they're still getting their feet under them, and you're kind of just throwing out the first 2 years and almost treating this year as year 1. And this guy has won before. We know he's a good coach. Like give him, like not that Harbaugh was winning. He just wasn't like beating Ohio State yet, but like can you learn? And sometimes the North has more patience than the South, which I often like. Can you just because of he really has the resume, like one more year, and then you would go into year 4 being like, now there's no doubt about it. Now he's officially on the hot seat. But we were not going to go. This is not going 3 years and out with a guy who's never done it before. This would be like 3 years and out with a playoff coach with the deep Midwest roots. Like, are you 100% sure that even if year 3 didn't work, that year 4 couldn't work? But then that puts them in a holding pattern. Now a program that if we had a 12-team playoff 10 years ago would have been in the playoff constantly is trapped treading water again. Right? I'm not even saying that is a big deal. Like they're out, right? They got left.
Yeah.
They were out on the dive boat. The dive boat left. Now they're treading water with sharks. And it's like, how long are they going to last? It's like, that's not that fun for fans. It's like, they're just going to get eaten by the sharks. Are they going to tread water for another couple hours and get to year 4? It's like, I don't know. Can we please try to make a playoff game? So.
And that's the larger part of it for me. That's the larger part of it for me. Yeah, yeah. Like I saw Steven in the chat said like, and I don't disagree with anything you said about Chris Ash and his role in setting the playoff landscape. I think all those are very compelling arguments in his favor to win this matchup, and that Luke Fickell is coaching for his job. But I almost don't care about that. I care about the program.
Yes,
right. But maybe I'm also being too dramatic. I would listen to that argument as well. So I don't want to be off base. But that's where my head is at. Like I just don't. I think Wisconsin is in a tricky spot that could last beyond this year if this isn't good this year.
Here's where I think you probably win this argument on 2 points. Point A, Marcus Freeman's the same side of the ball as Chris Ash. If it really gets out of hand, maybe just fire Chris Ash in week 7 and Marcus Freeman takes over defensive play calling and Notre Dame wins the national title. Or Mike Mickens. Like I'm not saying that's going to happen, but I mean, like, what's the worst case scenario? There's actually an out in the worst case scenario. So I think that's one thing. And the second thing is how important good Wisconsin football would be to the North. And I think we can forget that because we haven't seen, because the good Wisconsin we saw before that was kind of like Penn State is defined by, well, of course they're going to be good, but maybe in the end they're defined by what they're not as much as what they are. That in a 12-team playoff, you have an opportunity to seize more of what you are. And it's like, what was Wisconsin for a long time? It's like they're the 4th best team in the Big Ten. What did that get them? Big Ten championship game losses. So they wanted more than that. What would that get them now? Like a home playoff game? Like that would be. Yeah. So like if that Wisconsin, which I don't think there's anything fundamentally in the way that the sport has shifted that we should think that Wisconsin can't be that. That Wisconsin, huge for the North.
Yes. I'm looking back through Wisconsin season by season just to get a vibe for history. And I understand that, the sport was very different back when Barry Alvarez started. But he got 4 years to get it right. He was 1-10, 5-6, 5-6, and then went 10-1-1 and won the Rose Bowl, and then was off to the races. So maybe institutional knowledge would keep Luke Fickell in favor even if they have a losing season.
But I think, and like you said, the point is it's not about Luke Fickell. It's about Luke Fickell's impact on the North and what he can or maybe can't be for Wisconsin football. So all that, are you pretty strong on this? You'd take Fickell?
I'm riding with Fickell here.
Okay.
Only because and you saying that and I guess I raised the point, like if Ash isn't good, Notre Dame has an out.
You said that. Yeah, that's you.
Yeah,
you're right.
So
you're right. And I thought that's one of the best offseason conversations we've had has been about sort of like hiring coordinators and how you should think about it and the difference between that. And so I think we'll ride with that point here and we'll take the upset. Luke Fickell beats Chris Ash. It's a 13 over a 4. Let's go to the 5-12. It's Dan Lanning, the Oregon head coach, versus Jeff Nixon, the Syracuse offensive coordinator. This a little bit again is like, to me, it's like, is Syracuse going to be a thing? Is Fran Brown going to be a thing? And I didn't put Fran Brown in because I think keeping Jeff Nixon, who talked to the NFL, who really, I think, showed a lot as an offensive coordinator in year 1, if they can get sort of like this Ricky Collins thing going as a guy who certainly is not coming in with the resume that Kyle McCord had, but if they can be a place that can be an attractive offensive option that can show it again, that it wasn't just McCord, that it's maybe how Syracuse wants to play, come here. this is a great program to be a part of, that we can be an attractive option for transfer portal guys, and also start recruiting the heck out of like the best skill players in the Northeast. I think this is like a keystone year for Syracuse to like show that year one wasn't a fluke. And I think Jeff Nixon is a huge part of that. And then Dan Lanning's Dan Lanning. And what Dan already is in this sport is one of the best head coaches without a national title, which is a ridiculous thing to say, but it's a credit to him. And last year was awesome, but they lost their first playoff game. And like, this is like not blaming Dan Lanning for this, but I didn't want to just be like, Dan Lanning, we know who he is, don't put him in the bracket. So I kind of didn't know where to seed him, but I thought Jeff Nixon was kind of a live 12.
No, I think Jeff Nixon is a live 12, but I think Lanning belongs here, and I think you have him in a good spot, because I don't know the right way to word it. I was looking on Twitter this morning. Our pal Ari Wasserman had a list of the college football coaches with like the most approved in 2025, and he didn't have Dan Lanning on there. But like, if you wanted to have that conversation about the sport at large, I might consider putting Dan Lanning there, because he has so much juice, like without doing a whole lot when it comes to like putting your team in a position to like actually win a national title. And like, he hasn't been there for that long too. So I don't know if it's even fair to hold him to that standard necessarily, but he builds a championship roster. And then I think more often has come up short in the biggest games he's coached in, right? Like that was a knock before they beat Ohio State in the regular season. That was a knock on him. And then he got that win against the Buckeyes. And I thought that was a big deal. But then they got into the Rose Bowl and they got hammered by Ohio State. So like I think he needs to demonstrate an ability to win games like that before we sort of crown him as the next guy in the sport. And it's it's the same conversation we had with Ryan Day until he did it. I think it's probably only fair to have the same conversation about Dan Lanning, not to like say Dan Lanning stinks because he hasn't won a national title in 3 years at Oregon, but we hold him in such high esteem, and I think a lot of it is deserved. But there's a missing piece to that he is still chasing, and I think that makes him interesting in a conversation like this. So I think I would put him through over Nixon. I like Nixon. I think it was like actually a really good offensive coordinator hire by Fran Brown to go bring that guy out of the NFL. And it would be tremendous if Syracuse can build, not even be as good as it was last year by wins and losses, but just sustain a level of winning, sustain a level of offensive production would do a lot for that program. But Dan Lanning, I think, getting over the hump, however you want to define that, I think is more important to Northern football this year.
I don't want to forget about Dan Lanning. And Kid Legendary in the chats is saying Dan Lanning might inherit Ryan Day's sky high expectations. And so I don't like where Day was last year is not where Lanning is this year. But if Oregon doesn't have a run to the semis or like a, awesome year this year, then I think Dan Lanning might be like in the Ryan Day spot next year. But Oregon really matters. Oregon really matters in college football. And they were the only undefeated regular season team. Like they've just got the draw to face Ohio State that was geared up for that. Like they didn't do anything wrong last year. But if this year isn't great, then the 2024 season is just going to get lumped into like, well, they didn't win a playoff game. You know what I mean? Like it's like people are going to lose the nuance of what happened there and be like, it's going to turn into a first take. Can Dan Lanning win the big one?
Sure.
Kind of thing. So like, I don't think he's there yet, but I think if Oregon doesn't have a great year, I think a year from now, Dan Lanning could be the number one seed in this bracket.
I think so. And it's also funny to me, like we have had already in the show, the Natty or Bust conversation for Penn State. We're going to have it more. We talk more about James Franklin. Oregon is considered more of a favorite to win the national title than Penn State is. Oregon's third behind Ohio State and Texas, and then Georgia, and then it's Penn State. So like if arguably Oregon should be in more of a Natty or Bust mode than Penn State is, even though Oregon didn't retain its roster the same way that Penn State did. But I think Dan Lanning would tell you they expect to compete for the national championship every year. That's why he's there. So I think it's okay.
Yeah.
I think it's okay to hold them to the standard of competing for it, not necessarily like winning it every year.
No.
But I think that's where they are as a program, is like, you better be in the mix. And we've had discussions about their schedule. Like, well, 9 wins is out there, and I don't know if 9 wins get you in, right? So it's a pretty important year for him, I think.
And they're all of them just kind of like figuring out again. We've talked about it a million times what this is going to be like with Dante Moore as opposed to having like a Bo Nix or Dylan Gabriel, like super experienced quarterback to lean on. So we'll advance Dan Lanning. We won't pull the upset here. That was a live enough 12, but Dan Lanning's Dan Lanning.
Good 12. Yeah, good 12.
All right, 2:15. Brian Hartline, Ohio State offense coordinator versus Lance Leipold, the Kansas head coach. What do you think of Hartline as the 2 seed here?
It's a similar conversation to Chris Ash, although probably heightened because Hartline doesn't have any experience. At least Chris Ash has some.
Yes.
Even if he's
Chris
been out
Ash
of the game
actually,
for a while.
Chris Ash has a lot. Chris Ash made his bones as a very good defensive play caller. It's why he got a head coaching job. And then what he really did was sort of like he failed as a head coach, but he succeeded as a defensive coordinator. So we're just asking him to conjure that back up at Notre Dame. Brian Hartline is an excellent position coach. He's never done this.
Which is why I think if they're similar-ish profiles, that's the separator to make Hartline a 2 and Ash a 4. But there is the same thing with Marcus Freeman and Chris Ash that did Ryan Day and Brian Hartline. But there's a lot riding on it. I think it was such a big deal for Ryan Day to give up play calling in the first place, but at least when he did it, he gave it up to Chip Kelly. And when he decided to do that beforehand, it was with Bill O'Brien. Established guys with strong track records at the college and NFL level, at least from an offensive standpoint for Chip. This is different. This is a bit. I think you'd have to call it a little risky, right? Even if you're someone who believes in Brian Hartline, I think you'd have to admit it's a little risky. So he will be like among the most scrutinized coordinators, I think, in college football this year, if not the most, because of the shoes that he's stepping into and the expectations at Ohio State.
Lance Leipold, like the idea that Kansas is what it is at all is 100% entirely because Lance Leipold is an awesome college football coach. And we've covered, everyone knows the season they had last year. It got loose at the beginning and it was great at the end. And they're moving back into their stadium this year. And what if we did, we constantly are like trying to, I think we're inventing shows on the fly of how to couch the impact of head coaches. And we may just wind up doing a list in June. We might just do our top 20 head coaches list because we just have to, because everybody else does it. And we want the SEO. Hey, Bill and Doug made their list. But we've talked about like the percent of how much are you getting out of your program. I think a different percent of how much is your program wrapped up in you, the you-ness of a single head coach, the you-ness of Lance Leipold at Kansas. I don't even know. Is it the most in the country? They're like, why is that program as what it is? Because of the head coach. Is there somebody that you would say is vastly more?
Dabo.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, but that's what we're talking about. But also, I didn't know that there was a ton different with Lance Leipold to make him more than a 15. But my God, he matters.
Yeah, well, he does matter. I think you'd say maybe Kyle Whittingham prior to that. I mean, maybe we're seeing like the kind of the downfall of that now. Like if you hold on to that for too long.
But also, like we've seen all the up of that Kyle Whittingham, but also like, okay, as he get near the end of this, and then it's like he kind of just whiffed on the quarterback situation that killed their season.
Yeah,
it's like, but that was very Kyle Whittingham.
Yes, but Lance Leipold, I think, exacerbated. I don't know if that's the right word, but a little bit, because when they were struggling last year, he sort of like threw himself in front of it, which was to say like, we do things my way. And like, I guess it's not working now, but we're not going to change. And I guess he was rewarded for that. I suppose this season maybe will be.
He was 100% right. He was
100%
right.
Yeah. I guess the only thing I would say, like, what was he right, or the Jalen Daniels just get hot, right? I think this year will be maybe the ultimate determiner of whether or not, wrapping yourself in the Lance Leipoldness of whatever that is exactly what Kansas needs. I think it is. I like Lance Leipold's an incredible football coach. So I don't know that there's a whole lot different about him, or that there will be anything a whole lot different about him this year, as you said. So I think 15 seed is right. Like, we had Jalen Daniels win the bracket. Like, I think is far more influential in what that looks like than sort of what Lance Leipold is this, clearly, as we discussed last year, kind of went as Jalen Daniels went. So I have Heartline here winning, but I guess I would want to reiterate that, like, I think Lance Leipold is still very good at his job.
Yeah. Lance Leipold. We don't know what Brian Hartline is like as this. So Hartline advances 2 over the 15. Let's go to the 7-10, 2 head coaches. Brett Bielema. Oh, yeah. It's Brett Bielema and Rich Rodriguez. Brett Bielema and Rich Rodriguez. We got a little woof thing there in the graphic. But Brett Bielema, head coach at Illinois. Rich Rodriguez, head coach at West Virginia. This is tight. This is like reestablishing, because to me, why is Rodriguez the 10 seed? It's like, well, what if West Virginia gets back to what it was at the peak of Rich Rodriguez the first time around, which is like a playoff contender? I don't think that's impossible. If
Not
they
in the Big
get
12, no.
They rally the folks, they rally the community and get NIL, and then he is a quite good offensive coach who knows that state inside and out. And if he can maximize what West Virginia football can be, again, it's a little bit like the Wisconsin thing. What does good Wisconsin mean to Northern football? What does good West Virginia mean to Northern football and college football? We've seen it means a lot.
Yeah.
Also, I think Illinois could make a playoff run this year, and Brett Bielema, with 2 really good coordinators that have stuck around, and some other people, right, who have stuck around. Like, it's not a natty or bust, but I'm not so sure we wouldn't put playoff or bust on Illinois. That, like, if not now, when? Like, when is Illinois going to be more geared up for a run like this? So give me a pick here.
I think I'd go Bielema because of the playoff window.
Okay.
And what that could mean on the other side of it. Like, I still, and I'm not trying to get past the season. There's really no point. But part of me does wonder, like, say Illinois does get to the playoff, and like, what does that mean for Illinois football moving forward? Because we saw how elevating it was for Indiana. Like, Indiana went out and got Fernando Mendoza out of the transfer portal. Like, who would have ever thought that Indiana was going to get a quarterback of that caliber out of the transfer portal? But it's like they demonstrated an ability to compete at a level higher than anyone ever expected from them.
Yep.
So Illinois now has the opportunity to do that for itself. West Virginia is very important to the North, no doubt about it. I think there's some of, like, is the retread hire actually a good idea, kind of riding on the success or failures of Rich Rodriguez too. That's interesting.
Love retreads, but yes.
Yeah.
Scott Frost and Rich Rodriguez are going to everybody's going to do it or it's over.
Right. But I'm still going Bielema there because the playoff, I think, supersedes, whether or not West Virginia gets back on the right track.
Bielema's was, because I think it's 2-pronged. It's Bielema and the Illinois program. The Illinois program has often kind of been in a weird spot of why is it Illinois football where Wisconsin is, or where they were, or where Iowa is? Like, what if Illinois football is just or where Indiana, we think Indiana is going to be like just in this sort of like second tier Big Ten, like in the edge of the playoff mix? Like, why isn't Illinois there? I don't know. I feel like they've been kind of like a long-term underachieving program. This guy has won in the Big Ten before. I think Bielema is pretty good at this. What if this is like, hey, guess what? Illinois is here. As Kid Legendary says in the chat, if Illinois has a playoff run, they are off and running. This is what if they do this? But then also, like, what if Brett Bielema, what if people are like, that guy is up? Especially what if Iowa thinks that? Like, this is and Rich Rod, I think, matters long-term for West Virginia, but this is like Brett Bielema 2025. I think it's Bielema. So we'll advance him 7 over 10. Let's go to the 314. It's Jason Beck, the Utah OC, versus Dana Holgorsen, the Nebraska OC. Pretty good OC matchup here.
Really good OC matchup. I've been pounding the drum a little bit for Beck and how important and perhaps transformative that hire is going to be. I think Dana Holgorsen, I guess the way I would view them is like Dana Holgorsen has a opportunity to like stabilize Nebraska, which is good and important. But Beck has an opportunity to elevate Utah offensively. So I think that the seeds obviously reflect that with Beck being a 3 and Holgorsen being a 13 or 14. So I'm going Beck because of that, but I certainly acknowledge that they're both very important to their teams this year.
What if Holgorsen like unlocks year 2 Dylan Raiola? And what if it's like, oh, is Dylan Raiola the best quarterback in college football? Like, is that?
that would be interesting, but then I don't know that the upward mobility exists for Nebraska for that to be like all that important nationally. Whereas like if Utah has a good offense with Devin Dampier and Jason Beck, I think the defense is good enough for Utah to then win the Big 12 and get to the playoff. It's not Nebraska's fault, I guess. Well, I guess it is Nebraska's fault if it's not the Big 12, but
well, that's true. Yeah, unless like if you think the rule thing is going to come together and like Nebraska has a defensive history, you don't love the defensive coordinator hire, and they lost Tony White, like the elevation of John Butler. I could have put John Butler, I guess, in here too, right? Like there's probably real questions there. Are they going to need, is Holgorsen going to have to do something even more to elevate that? Whereas what Utah has with Morgan Scalley, with Kyle Whittingham, like there's an assumption with the defense. And as long as the quarterback can stay healthy, and this might be a real shot in the arm. I think Holgorsen makes a compelling case, but you're all about Beck. So I don't disagree here, but I also don't want to short sell how much Dana Holgorsen I think matters to the progress of Dylan Raiola and how much Dylan Raiola matters to Northern football if it really hits or if it doesn't. Like if Dylan Raiola winds up becoming like a first-round quarterback, which means, does that mean Nebraska is definitely a playoff team? No. Does it mean that like nobody wants to play him and they beat some good teams and they matter and they get talked about and it like is a thing that like gets people fired up about Nebraska football and that helps Rule build it even more? Like whether Dylan Raiola maximizes or not at Nebraska, I think is like a gigantic Northern storyline, and his play caller is a huge part of that. So I don't want to undersell that, but I'll agree on Beck here.
Okay. I also like that Beck could like give new life to the closing chapter of the coaching career of a guy who's like one of the best coaches to ever do it in Kyle Whittingham. And like if that happened while Whittingham took a different kind of swing offensively that I don't think a lot of coaches of his stature and longevity would have done, I think that would be interesting. So yeah. So I'm Beck over Holgorsen.
All right. Another OC matchup, 6'11", Chip Lindsey, the new Michigan OC coming from North Carolina, and Matt Wells, the Kansas State OC, as we said, had been on the staff last year, takes over as a play caller this year. Again, we think Kansas State is like a very, very, very legit Big 12 title contender, playoff contender. But Chip Lindsey being in charge of the offense that is going to be the home of Bryce Underwood at some point, whether that starts week 1, week 6, next year, whenever, is like an incredible responsibility. This, I think, is a good matchup. Good job by
it's really it's a really good matchup. This one's actually pretty difficult. I don't know. So this is for Avery Johnson. Is this like technically his 4th offensive coordinator in 3 years? Right. Like that, some stability for Avery Johnson, because I like you're going to have Avery Johnson this year and next year. If you can get like some of that with Matt Wells, that would be great. But perhaps the undertaking of getting Bryce Underwood right is a responsibility that supersedes anything that Matt Wells has going on for himself at Kansas State.
And Matt Wells is a veteran who was on the staff, and they're kind of just like keeping this thing going. Whereas like Chip Lindsey's coming in from the outside because they were a mess offensively last year. And like of all the people, like this is the guy that Sharon Moore went and got and said like, this is like the answer to this. So I think both the way he got there and like Avery Johnson, I think maybe, I had him as the 1 seed in the quarterback bracket. Like Avery Johnson is incredibly important to this. I don't know that like Matt Wells is a make or break guy for Avery Johnson. Like I think most people would sort of be able to look at Avery Johnson and be like, well, this is what he does well, and this is where we can help him get a little bit better. And he has these talents, and here we go. Whereas you are creating something from scratch to take advantage of a supremely talented player in Bryce Underwood. And that is a great responsibility. So I think we're going Chip Lindsey.
Yeah. And I think like, I think even if Matt Wells is like gives Kansas State more or less the same of what it's gotten the last couple of years, Kansas State can still win the Big 12, maybe. And Chip Lindsey, I think, is being entrusted to elevate an offense that, if it's good, can get Michigan back to the playoff.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's go to the next round. We'll go a little faster here. James Franklin, Andy Kotelnicki. Is there a case for Kotelnicki that the OC is more important than the head coach for Penn State?
Not in this particular case. No, I think I'm going Franklin. Franklin, because he just sets the tone for everything.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's Franklin.
I think that's right. So we'll advance James Franklin. Luke Fickell, Dan Lanning. This is pretty interesting, actually.
It's pretty spicy. Man, I don't know. I think I'm going Fickell here.
I think I might go too, because I think everything we said about Dan Lanning is like, well, like, what if but none of it is about right now. Like, he's good. They're good. They're going to be some version of good. Are they going to be 12-0 good? Are they going to be like 10-2 good? And like, whatever, are they going to win the national title or make the playoff and come up just short? Of course it matters, but there's more variance with Luke Fickell.
Yeah, because even if it does, whatever it looks like for Oregon, they make the playoff, they win the national championship, they get in and lose their first game, they come up like a game short of making the playoff, they're going to be right back in the national title conversation next year because of the way they built the roster. So it's like it's not as dire straits for Dan Lanning as it is for Luke Fickell.
No, it's not. I mean, that's what we said before, as much as like, it's not coming to a head yet for Dan Lanning. So we don't want to forget about him. But the fate of Wisconsin football is at stake in 2025.
Yeah, not to put too fine of a point on it.
So we'll advance Luke Fickell. All right, Brian Hartline versus Brett Bielema. Ooh, another spicy one here. And again, like this just gets into. I really thought Hartline, because Ohio State's the defending national champ, they lost both coordinators. I think they had arguably the best coordinator pair in the country last year. They're going with like two much less experienced guys, even though Matt Patricia has been a coordinator in the NFL. He hasn't been that in college. Brian Hartline has never called plays. I guess I could have gone Matt Patricia here, but I just feel like the identity of Ohio State, like with Ryan Day, it's just been such a thing. Yes, Ryan Day's a backstop, but giving up play calling was such a big thing for him. So, and Ohio State, they're the defending national champ. Like, could they make a run at it again? Like, Brian Hartline matters there, but like, what does good Illinois mean for Northern football? And Brett Bielema is like a face of Northern football in some ways. And so whether he's shoving people in garbage cans. So is he shoving people in garbage cans while he's 11-1, which is like, wow. Like, he's now the official. If they make the playoff, if they're this year's Indiana, which we've talked about a lot, I think he becomes the official ambassador of Northern football. If they're 7-5, and he's shoving people in garbage cans, is he just kind of a blowhard? Right? Like, that's the thing. Like, what he is, who he is, which is kind of what I like about Brett Bielema. But your record determines how much people listen to you. So I think there's a compelling Bielema case here. I just decided that. If they're 11-1, he's the official ambassador of Northern football. That feels like a win. I don't know.
A lot riding on that. No, I'm putting Bielema through here.
Oh, okay.
I agree with everything you said. And like, while Brian Hartline is incredibly important, and I'm fascinated to see how that plays out, like, it is hard for me to label that too much of a high stakes situation when Ohio State just won the national title. It's like Ryan Day, like, is not entrusting his job security to a guy who hasn't done it before. He has all the job security in the world because he just won a national title, which has emboldened him to give it to a guy who's never done it before.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So we'll advance the 7 over the. Do you think Hartline was overseeded then?
Maybe a tad. Yeah. But still, I think you're right to have him instead of Patricia, just because of the inexperience.
Okay. So we'll advance the 7 seed over the 2, Brett Bielema. And then we have the 3-6, Jason Beck versus Chip Lindsey. Another OC showdown here, Landis. What do you think?
Yeah. For as much as I'm intrigued by Jason Beck, I think it's Lindsey. Because it would be great for Utah football if Jason Beck and that offense can like reinvigorate something. But if it doesn't, then all you're kind of doing is heading down a path that you halfway expected anyway. Like Kyle Whittingham has already announced that he's retiring. You sort of have plans in place for what that's going to look like already. So I don't. Whatever you think of a coach and waiting plan aside, like, it's not like if the offenses are good and they end up having to make a change, or Kyle Whittingham decides to make a change, like you're going to be searching for something. You at least have that plan in place. And Lindsey, like I said, is trying to get Michigan back to the playoff. So I think it's Lindsey.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's fascinating. I don't think this will happen, but like the idea that like Michigan's offense is still a mess and they are like not playing Bryce Underwood because they don't want to put him into this terrible situation, or they are playing him and doing nothing to help him. That's disastrous.
Yes.
So like the floor for what could happen, like Utah is coming off a disaster. And if Jason Beck can't single-handedly clean up the mess, then it's like, well, okay, I don't know. Like this was like, as you said. So like, but I'll, because of the floor as much as anything, I'll agree with advancing Lindsey. So we'll take the 6 over the 3 there. So now our semifinal matchups are a 1-13 and a 6-7. Let's actually go with Bielema Lindsey first. Illinois head coach, Michigan offensive coordinator. Landis, what do you think?
I'm going Illinois head coach because of how propulsive it could be for Illinois as a program.
Okay.
If it does what it wants to do this year. Like even if Michigan's offense is a mess and like it turns out maybe like the vibes aren't great with Lindsey and Michigan doesn't make the playoff, I think there's still an opportunity for Michigan to like be better and like on the periphery of the playoff talk in a way that would at least signify some progress and not be a total disaster. And then Michigan, I think, would still be fine, maybe long term. I guess NCAA stuff notwithstanding, whatever that might look like. It's just a far bigger deal for Illinois, I think, for Brett Bielema to like have one of his best coaching jobs this year than it is, I think, for Chip Lindsey to do it at Michigan.
All right, I'll buy that. We'll advance Brett Bielema, and then James Franklin, Luke Fickell, 2 head coaches against each other on this side of the ball, and it's going to be hard to get past Franklin, but like, is Fickell the kind of guy who can make the case that we've already made that like, is Fickell and Wisconsin, is it more make or break than Franklin and Penn State season is?
Yes, but I think both are like staring down potential identity crises if they don't achieve what they hope to achieve this year. What they're looking for are very different. Wisconsin's merely looking to get back to being a winning football team, and Penn State's trying to win a national title. But if Penn State falls short of that, then it has to take a hard look in the mirror, I think, and ask itself, like, how should we consider ourselves in this world if this team, the way the roster is constructed, doesn't take a real charge at winning a national title? And I actually don't know. I don't know that I'm 100% convinced that those are higher stakes than what Wisconsin's potentially staring down, but I think probably they are.
Okay.
Plus, like, for our purposes, like what's important to the North, like a good Wisconsin is really important to the North, but like then so is, I think anytime we can have multiple programs like rising up and showing themselves capable of competing for national championships, I think matters a whole lot too. And that's a position that Penn State's in. So I would say Franklin.
All right. So Penn State and Wisconsin do not play this season, but James Franklin beats Luke Fickell in our bracket, which makes our championship in the coaches region 1 seed James Franklin versus 7 seed Brett Bielema. And Penn State and Illinois also do not face each other this season. So this will be the only showdown between these two guys. Do you like James Franklin? Do you like Brett Bielema?
I like Franklin because I think the national title expectations are real and warranted. And like, it wouldn't be, oh my goodness, the sky is falling, like if Illinois somehow only won 9 games and didn't make the playoffs, something like that. But it become, like I said, I think there's some uncomfortable conversations that happen at Penn State. Not that James Franklin's job's in jeopardy necessarily, as long as they make the playoff. Even if they don't, frankly, his buyout's ridiculous. There's just a lot riding on James Franklin like legacy here, I think, this season, and Penn State program identity that I think is Franklin.
I mean, I think that we maybe all kind of knew where we were going to get to in this coaches region. Kid Legendary mentions in the chat that Illinois currently has the number 9 recruiting class, according to 24/7 Sports. And the idea that, again, like if Illinois can do something now, are they stacking something that is the beginning of something at Illinois football? don't think that's impossible, but I think that's why we put Brett Bielema in the championship game here. It's go time for Penn State, and
it is go time.
Like I just think we can't. You know, what are you gonna do? It's like I think it's James Franklin. I think he was the obvious 1 seed, and I think he also remains the obvious winner. And we're going to talk about him more. So James Franklin is the winner of our bracket in the coaches region. This now means Penn State coach James Franklin, Kansas quarterback Jalen Daniels, and Ohio State receiver Jeremiah Smith are in our final 4 of most important Northern football people for 2025. We will do the defensive player bracket on Wednesday's show. But for now, a quick break. We'll come back and talk more about like what are the comparison points here for James Franklin and Penn State on Kings of the North. That's long, but that's a good bracket, man. I don't know. It's a good bracket.
That was my favorite bracket we've had so far. Yeah.
It's just an excuse to talk ball. We just want to talk ball. March.
Right.
Everybody knows that, right? But also, like, we're telling you what we think. We're telling you what we think matters. All right, good bracket. I got a bunch about James Franklin. Here's part of it. He's going into year 12. There is not a huge history in modern college football of a guy winning his first national championship in year 12 at his school.
Yeah.
And I
was surprised by these numbers when you sent them to me.
Like, I don't even know. I wish I knew what it means.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a couple things that it means. But what I did is I went back the last 20 head coaches to win national titles. 2 of them made the list twice. So there are 22 names on this graphic that producer Mike put together for us, because Urban Meyer won titles at 2 schools and Nick Saban won titles at 2 schools. So this is the year these coaches were the last 20 individual coaches to win national titles, which has taken us back a while. This is the year they were at their school for their first title. Tom Osborne at Nebraska was in year 22 at Nebraska. Bobby Bowden at Florida State was in year 18. And I will tell you, like, the 21st coach, if I had gone back one more, Joe Paterno at Penn State won his first national title in year 17 at Penn State. So, like, these are 3 legends. Osborne, Nebraska, Bowden, Florida State, Paterno, Penn State. Paterno didn't quite make the list. Who did not win national titles until well into their second decade or past it at their schools. James Franklin is nowhere close to how long it took these guys. So, but then there's a giant gap. When we get to like the modern era, there's nobody like James Franklin. There's nobody, because then we're down to 9 years with Jim Harbaugh and Dabo Swinney, who I also think are kind of outliers within the modern era. But why are Osborne, Bowden, and Paterno so different here, Bill? And I did go back and I did look in the newspapers.com archive, and I was reading stories where people were talking about how these guys couldn't win a national title. Okay. In 1977, Penn State, 77 or 78, lost in the national title game. Joe Paterno and Penn State lost to Alabama and Bear Bryant. Now, the one thing about Joe Paterno was that he was talking about a playoff back then, which Penn State people know, but it's like Joe Paterno was like, why are we doing this? Why don't we have a 4-team? Why don't we play the Bulls and then have a 4-team playoff? And it was like, my God, that guy said that in the 70s. I saw the word futile. Like, people were like, well, this guy can't win it. Here we go again. Penn State trying to win the national title. And then they didn't. Like, they lost to Alabama in that Sugar Bowl, and then they didn't win it until 82. So he was like, I think it was in year 13 I think it was the 78 season. So he's right at the James Franklin spot where they were getting close. They were there every year and not doing it. And people were like, oh, this guy chasing the national title can't do it. Bobby Bowden, until he won it, people were like, oh, this guy can't win it. But now we look at them as legends. I'm not saying that in the modern day they would be fired for not winning a national title. But I guess, am I also asking, is James Franklin Joe Paterno? Like, I don't know what I'm asking.
Yeah, I think that we know the sport is drastically different now in terms of what it values than it was back then, right? Like, these guys are not only football coaches, they're like viewed as university institutions, and like molder of men still mattered, and like student athlete was actually correctly applied in all these circumstances, right? So it's almost not even worth comparing. It probably isn't worth comparing because college football is just so different now than it was then, and it's more win at all costs and far lower tolerance for not even losing, just merely like coming up short of whatever you frame your expectations as. And I think existed back when these guys were toiling through decades of not winning national titles.
So this list is Tom Osborne. Tom Osborne won it in year 22 at Nebraska. Bobby Bowden in year 18 at Florida State. Jim Harbaugh, year 9 at Michigan, and I think Harbaugh and Franklin are decent comparisons here. Dabo Swinney, year 9 at Clemson. I think Dabo Swinney and James Franklin are decent comparisons here. Mac Brown, year 8 at Texas, which again, I think there's a little something there. Phil Fulmer and Steve Spurrier at Tennessee and Florida won it in year 7. Ryan Day at Ohio State, Kirby Smart at Georgia won their first titles in year 6. Nick Saban at LSU was year 4. Ed Orgeron at LSU was year 4. Jimbo Fisher at Florida State was year 4. So that's everybody who took between 4 and 22 years to win their first national title. Here's all the guys who won it super fast. Nick Saban, year 3 at Alabama. Urban Meyer, year 3 at Ohio State. Les Miles, year 3 at LSU. Pete Carroll, year 3 at USC. Lloyd Carr, year 3 at Michigan. And year 2, Urban Meyer at Florida, Gene Chizik at Auburn, Bob Stoops at Oklahoma, and Jim Tressel at Ohio State. And Larry Coker won it in year 1 at Miami. There was this run here where guys were winning. And part of this was, and this is where I think we have to give a guy like James Franklin credit. When you're winning it in year 2, to some degree, you are winning it on the back of the guy before you. Because especially like before the transfer portal, like it's their recruits who are like your 3rd and 4th year players. So Urban Meyer at Florida was helped by Ron Zook's recruiting. Gene Chizik was just helped by Cam Newton falling out of the sky. But like nobody was like, Gene Chizik, he's a legend. It's like, whatever, that happened. Bob Stoops like inherited some stuff. Jim Tressel inherited some stuff from John Cooper. Larry Coker obviously inherited the legacy of Miami football and kept it going for a little bit and then fell off a cliff. Like James Franklin did not inherit that. So Bill O'Brien was charged with like kind of like getting the program's feet back under it after the Paterno fiasco. And Bill O'Brien did a decent job at that. But certainly what James Franklin inherited was not a ready to win on day one kind of program. So like is there almost no connection between James Franklin Penn State and Joe Paterno Penn State in reality? And if that's the case, do we have to make sure we are giving James Franklin credit for building something basically from scratch that is now legitimately a national title contender, which is so different than so many of the guys on this list who weren't building from scratch? They were taking over failures. That's why those coaches got fired, but there was something to work with. I don't know. The point I wanted to make here, Bill, with a list like this is that if James Franklin wins a national title at Penn State, it will be borderline unprecedented in the modern era. That's what I'm trying to say here. That nobody since Bowden or Osborne has taken more than a decade at their school to eventually win a national title. Everybody like that never won one. Yeah. All those guys who lasted this long without winning one never got there. So James Franklin, like, I think sort of like to his credit and to his detriment, is in this range of guys where he kind of stands alone.
I guess, yeah, I think you're right. The closest thing, I guess, that we've seen is probably Dabo, right? Like building a thing over a number of years. elevating it, getting on the precipice of it, and then all of a sudden spiking for 2 national titles in 3 years. So yeah, maybe the conversation around James Franklin has been a little off base. It's been so defined by he can't win this, he can't win that, with little acknowledgement of what he built to put Penn State in the position to make those big games in the first place.
Yes. And is built the right word?
I think it's the right word, because it wasn't like the end of Paterno wasn't great. I guess 2010 Penn State wasn't too bad. Or was it 2008 Penn State wasn't too bad. But even if if Penn State would have ended, Joe Pa's reign would have ended under normal circumstances, I don't know that the program is in tremendous shape, whoever took it over after him. And then it really unraveled on them. And Bill O'Brien was just, I think, trying to help it tread water and did a great job doing that. But that was merely to keep a level of winning, not a level of championship contention. So James Franklin took that, and I think it took a couple years, but elevated it to something far beyond what it had been probably for almost a decade by that point. So I think he's built something. Yeah, I think Penn State, the part of the frustration for Penn State fans, I think, is that James Franklin has pushed the program to the point where people are expecting him to break through for a national championship, and he hasn't done it. But the reason they think that is because of what he's done over the decade that he's been there. So it's I guess it's a double-edged sword kind of thing. He's a victim of his own success in some respects, but I do think eventually you have to break through. I don't know, if he just keeps winning 10 games every year, maybe that should be enough. I don't know that it will be enough for Penn State fans. Once you demonstrate an ability to get to that point, I don't think it's unreasonable to expect a breakthrough.
Penn State has finished in the top 10 of the final AP poll, after the postseason, 5 of the last 9 years. They had finished in the top 10 of the AP poll 5 of the previous 22 years. So that's end of Paterno, into Bill O'Brien, into the first couple years of James Franklin when he was resetting it. So you can, it's sort of part of the point I want to make here is I do think clearly when you have a legendary coach and all the off-field stuff that certainly matters and has been covered a million times aside, when you're talking about the football part of it, what Joe Paterno did to build Penn State certainly matters, but I just don't know how much of that is left that Penn State being good right now is related to that at all. If you just started a college right now in the mountains of Pennsylvania in this modern age, it was hey, you want to come play football here? People be like, what? So
yeah,
of course,
tradition. And yeah, right. Yeah.
But also it's not like 5 top 10s in 22 years. It's not like it was steamrolling when James Franklin took over. And that's not thinking about everything that tore the program apart. So this was quite a thing that at the very least, he had to rebuild it. And that does take time. So my point with these numbers are A, it's a little bit unusual, and B, what if we're right at the point where oh yeah, James Franklin rebuilt this and he's about to become Dabo? I don't know that anybody is thinking of it that way, but I'm not sure that's not what's going to happen.
No, but I guess the difference is that I don't know this for certain, but I don't recall. No, there was a conversation of Clemsoning. I guess there was. It is pretty similar.
Oh,
yeah. I was going to say that Dabo didn't have the same thing attached to him that James Franklin does, but he definitely did because there was a verb for it.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know that there's anybody out there that's expecting James Franklin to suddenly do what Dabo did. The expectation is oh, I can't wait to see how he screws this up. That's
which
sort of what follows us around. Yeah.
Which I think is what everybody thought about Dabo. Now the difference is Dabo got Deshaun Watson. And so is could James Franklin be Dabo Sweeney? Maybe. Is Drew Aller Deshaun Watson? Almost definitively not. So then does it require, if you're a successful coach who hasn't gotten over the top, does it require a generational type player to get you over the top? What changed at Clemson? What do you mean what changed at Clemson? Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence changed at Clemson. That's what changed. So is that happened? Is that happening? And then it's sort of like, well, all the winning that Dabo did to rebuild Clemson helped lead to like, hey, Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence want to come play here. Great. Now they're getting us over the top. I don't know that the winning that James Franklin has done has led, I mean, unless it was Abdul Carter, has led to the kind of recruiting wins that it's like, and there's the get over the top recruiting win that will get them over the top. Except actually that kind of is Drew Aller. It's a 5-star quarterback from Ohio who's like, yeah, I'll go to Penn State. It's like, okay, yeah. They've never had a guy like this. Drew Aller's not Deshaun Watson unless he is Deshaun Watson.
Right. I think there's I hesitate to even bring this up, but I actually do think there's some validity to it. Steven brought it up in the chat. Like, he said that James Franklin is Jim Harbaugh unless he starts cheating, which, by the way, is probably worth it. Like, that's tied to Michigan's rise. And like, Clemson's national titles come with Brett Venables being like the best sign stealer in college football as their defensive coordinator. And they also had like performance enhancing drug stuff hovering over the program at the time that Clemson was winning national titles. So like, there is like a go find an edge if you want to, soft pedal it.
Can't talk about football.
Maybe for Penn State.
Nothing. We can't talk about it. It's like we're just diving in. We're just having a giant Joe Paterno, Deshaun Watson conversation, but we're like, but only football. I'm just saying it could happen. I'm just saying, James, this is why he won. He is in such an interesting spot. Okay, the hurdle to overcome. Bobby Bowden, in his first 17 years against Miami, was 5-12 against Miami. And like Bobby Bowden's thing was like, oh, what's the Miami loss? It's going to ruin the season this year. Like that was just like an accepted thing that happened to Florida State all the time. That included a stretch from 1987 to 1992, which is before he won his first national title at Florida State, when he was 1-5 against Miami and 63-4 against everybody else in the country. He lost to Miami more than he lost to everyone else. And that's like bowl games against great teams. So that's where Bobby Bowden was. Before they did it. And then he won 2 national titles. And then when he did it, starting in 1993, Florida State went 6-1 against Miami the next 7 years. Like they got over their hurdle. Is Ohio State James Franklin's Miami? Like, is this a hurdle that can be overcome? And then like the side discussion of that is like, well, it doesn't matter because he doesn't have to beat Ohio State to win the national championship, which is, unless you do. But it's like, if James Franklin, it's like they didn't beat Ohio State. They got in. Oregon knocks out Ohio State. Penn State does this. Penn State gets in to the national title game against Oregon. They had played Oregon pretty, like they learned from that and they beat Oregon and they lose to Ohio State, win the national championship. Like that could have happened last year. But again, it's like one of the things when you have a hurdle, I think it's a decent comparison as a hurdle so far. James Franklin's beaten Ohio State once. Does it mean you're never going to get over it? Or at some point, do you learn to get over it? Bobby Bowden.
I don't know that. Well, Bobby Bowden learned, and also Miami got bad. Like the end of Dennis Erickson and the Butch Davis was like Miami was a very different program than it had been in the beginning of Derek Erickson and Jimmy Johnson. So like I don't see Ohio State falling off anytime soon. So I think it will remain a hurdle in some respects for Jay. It'll be like a thing that I think every time the two teams play each other will be held over James Franklin's head. But it's not an impediment to winning a national title because there are years coming down the pike where Penn State doesn't play Ohio State. And there are certainly pathways to Penn State winning a national championship where like they can let Texas or Georgia try to take care of Ohio State for them before they get to the national title. So I don't think it's
like it won't count. It can't be like, well, you didn't beat Ohio State. So it's like, this is a national title. You had to win. You played 16 games. Yeah.
Welcome to the 12-team playoff. Yeah. So like a hurdle, yes. Brick wall in front of them keeping Penn State from winning a national title, no.
The old days, we kind of talked about this already, but it's like, again, I was like, do Joe Paterno, in the end, do Joe Paterno, Bobby Bowden, and Tom Osborne have anything to do with James Franklin? Yes or no? Are there any lessons? No. Okay.
Yeah.
I tried. James, I'm trying, brother. I don't know what to tell you. I I really should be at the news conference today with James Franklin. Be like, James, do you know that you're only in year 12 and Tom Osborne didn't win his first national title until year 22 and Joe Paterno didn't win it until year 17? Shouldn't everybody chill out, James? And he'd be like, that is a great question. Kings of the North? Great question. Also, are you natty or bust this year, James Franklin? Then there's these coaches who never win one. And this is like the other side of this. So I was just looking, College Football Reference. I don't know if this is the be all end all, but I was sorting by winning percentage for college football coaches. And this is one of those, like, it's hard when the list includes like John Gagliardi and like the guys who are winning at Division III Minnesota schools. And it's like, I acknowledge it. It's not what I'm talking about. So this was just like major college coaches, similar winning percentage. So James Franklin in his career right now is 687. It's good. It's like top 100 all time, right? Like, I mean, you win 2/3 of your games. That includes Vanderbilt. Like, you're good. Here's some guys, no national titles. Is this what we're talking about? Don James at Washington, like legend, right? Like everybody loves Don James, right? Like nobody is doubting his acumen and except he won a national title. So actually, like, that's a bad comparison by me. I forgot, right? They won the national title in like his second to last year. That was the one they shared. Yeah. So he's not on the list. Took him a long time too. Sorry, you're no Don James, James Franklin. You might have to wait until like you're 30. All right. Not him. Bad comparison. Is he John Cooper? Does that make him feel better? Are you John Cooper? Is that better? James Franklin is John Cooper. Is that John Cooper has a 691 winning percentage and he's in the Hall of Fame? Is that a compliment or like, dear God, don't do this to me? Because we were John Coopering Ryan Day a year ago.
Yeah, no.
James Franklin's John Cooper. He's not Don James. Okay, sorry. No. It might be John Cooper.
You don't want to be John Cooper. No.
Okay. Could it be Mike Bellotti at Oregon, who like ushered in Chip Kelly, but like never won a national title? Mike Bellotti, 678 winning percentage.
Mike Bellotti will need to remind that it was the head coach at Oregon, like not Kelly coached there for 25 years. Yeah.
You don't, that's not good. You don't want to be that. Terry Donahue, UCLA, 665, similar winning percentage. Mike Gundy and Kyle Whittingham are like kind of two guys right now who like maybe James Franklin's on that path. Similar winning percentages. They've both been really good, but also Penn State's not Utah and Oklahoma State. So that actually probably doesn't fit either, right?
I think Penn State holds itself in much higher esteem. Yes.
James, do you think that Penn State views itself as a better program than Oklahoma State? Yeah, you're probably right. Pat Dye at Auburn, 711 winning percentage. I don't know. Could that be one? Brian Kelly. Brian Kelly went to LSU to win a national title, like is James Franklin Brian Kelly, but who wants to be Brian Kelly right now?
Yeah, I mean, that's not a bad comparison, but I wouldn't want to be Brian Kelly. Yeah.
Mark Richt at Georgia. I think that's not a bad comparison, but like the whole thing about Mark Richt at Georgia is in the end, they were waiting to get him out of there so they could bring in the guy who could actually win national titles at Georgia. So if you're like James Franklin, do you think you're Mark Richt, which means there's somebody out there waiting to be Kirby Smart? Like that's not like it, do you want to be Mark Richt? Like it's good, but also it's not necessarily what you're thinking about here. Frank Beamer at Virginia Tech, like legend. Similar winning percentage, played for a national title, but also Penn State probably should be better than Virginia Tech, right?
Well, I don't better than what Virginia Tech was in Beamer's heyday. I don't know.
Okay,
Virginia Tech and Penn State like actually feel like kind of similar to me. Maybe that's just because they're in the mountains and they're hard to get to. I don't know. I actually don't.
It's kind of what this whole show is based around. Yeah,
yeah. I don't hate that comparison actually.
So then it's like, would you want to be Frank Beamer, who like finished in the top 25, like basically every year until the end when he kind of fell off and had like a 4 years at the end where he kind of fell off, but otherwise 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, like finished in the top 20, like 26 out of 29 years or something. Like the guy won like a maniac. Like if he winds up.
Yeah. From 2004 to 2011, Frank Beamer won 10, 11, 10, 11, 10, 10, 11, 11. Not bad.
Which, you know who that sounds like? James Franklin. But
then Frank Beamer held on too long, and held on long enough to go 7-6 and leave.
But I guess like were people like with Frank Beamer were like, this Frank Beamer, he can't win a national title. I don't know. I don't know. I don't know.
Bill Snyder.
I don't know.
Godzilla threw out Bill Snyder.
Yeah. So like what? So it's like on one hand, it's like, what if he's Harbaugh or Dabo? Okay. Well, that still could happen. On the other hand, what if he's Bill Snyder or Mark Richt or Frank Beamer? Like, is that bad? I don't know.
I don't think it's bad. No.
But would that make Penn State fans happy? Like if he's there 20 years and doesn't win a national title, how will Penn State fans look back on the James Franklin era?
With disappointment.
Okay, so like that.
Yeah.
But I don't like. Are people at Kansas State like, oh man, Bill Snyder, that freaking loser? No, they're like, we love that guy, Frank Beamer.
Yeah,
I think
stadium's named after him.
you running into Well, we can't the whole Paterno thing, but you're running onto Franklin Field. Actually, there's a Franklin Field. You're running onto right Franklin Stadium. Oh my God. Franklin Stadium, was he a legend? It's like, well, he didn't win a national title, but he won 10 games every year for 20 years. No, so I don't know. I think he's Mark Richt. If he doesn't win a national title, I think he's Mark Richt. I think that's the best comparison that we've stumbled upon.
Yeah.
But then if you're now Penn State people listening to this, like, if he's Mark Richt, could we get to our Kirby era like tomorrow? What are we waiting for? Because like, what if Matt Rule's your Kirby?
What if Kirby's your Kirby?
Now that feels like a thing too. That's right up there with dog mentality. Hey, what if Kirby's your Kirby, man? Who's your Kirby? Kirby's my Kirby. What if Kirby's your Kirby? That's a legendary sentence on this show. Jim Harbaugh overhauled his staff after year 6 at Michigan, and then the new staff sent them in the playoff for 3 straight years. Franklin hasn't overhauled the staff, but adding Knowles and Kotelnicki in the last 2 years, they lost Jawan Sider's really good running backs coach, but like Stan Drayton, and they're like, that's not necessarily a plus, but it's like, I think Drayton was a good fill-in for that. A couple other guys, Hagans and Barnes, haven't been around a long time, like Poindexter's in year 5. The point I wanted to make here, I feel like Harbaugh reshaping that staff was obviously like the thing that got Michigan over the top, right? Mm-hmm. Sharon Moore comes in, gets more responsibility. Mike McDonald to Jesse Minter on the defensive side of the ball. Like, what if that's what we definitely could be in that? It's like, oh, what got James Franklin over the top? It's like Andy Kotelnicki and Jim Knowles got them over the top. They have the best coordinator combo in the country. That's what happened. We might be standing right in the midst of that. And then as we look back, it's like, well, what was the difference? Maybe the difference wasn't Deshaun Watson, but the difference was this.
Yeah, it could be. I think they have a really good staff this year. This is probably the best staff that James Franklin has brought to the table, starting with the coordinators. But he's always done a nice job too of getting like some former Penn State guys in there, like Deion Barnes, Terry Smith. I think Ty Howley's their tight ends coach. He did a borderline, I think, transformative hire by getting Phil Troutwine to come coach the offensive line and like really kind of whip that group into shape. So that part of it is very much aligned. Obviously, he's at the top, and the questions will remain like whether or not he can get himself to the position to win a national title. But in terms of like building a championship staff, I think he's practically done that with what he's assembled this year.
Really might be a championship staff. Like really like this is. So then my question is something holding Penn State back? And then the answer is it's James Franklin. If something is, like, there's nothing else. And this is going to be an ongoing conversation. His record against AP top 5 teams is terrible. Joe Paterno, this is from a ESPN story last year. Joe Paterno was 3-12 in his first 15 games against AP top 5 teams. This was a thing like for Ryan Day a little bit before the playoff run last year at Ohio State. He had a losing record against top 5 teams, and then he beat like 3 straight top 5 teams, right? In Oregon, Texas, and Notre Dame. So sometimes you have it until you don't, but you can't ignore this. And I guess the thing is, people maybe thought they saw something with James Franklin last year, getting a little more aggressive at the end of the year. It was becoming like aggressive in the regular season Minnesota game in a way that really mattered and helped Penn State get over the top. But then I think you also can look at like the Notre Dame game and you feel like Penn State kind of found a way to lose that game that reinforced some of the things. But are we on the edge of like James Franklin shedding this? Because this is why he was the winner in our bracket. It feels like he has had problem. It doesn't feel like he's had problems winning these games. And what it feels like is like he's the problem. And will that change in year 12? Like, is that an unfair conversation?
I don't think so. I think like, can you change when you're that far into it? I think is an interesting conversation. Then I don't know that I feel strongly one way or the other necessarily, but I think that is the conversation. I was looking at some roster stuff to see if anything popped when we like tried to figure out like what's holding Penn State back. The only thing I could like kind of zero in on is the fact that like Penn State's not super aggressive in the transfer portal. Like compared to its peers, which like for me when I was looking stuff up, I use Michigan, Notre Dame, and Ohio State. In the last 4 years, Michigan has signed 33 transfers, Notre Dame 28, Ohio State 26, and Penn State 22. And there could be something to like not only is Penn State not super aggressive in the transfer portal, but also when it goes into the portal, maybe its hit rate is not quite what it should be. I didn't look into that
last year, right?
Hit on the corners
has
yet,
Harris and Jalen Kimber
has yet to hit on a receiver. Like Chop Robinson was a transfer, who was obviously a very good player for Penn State too. It's not like they've whiffed on everybody, but I think like championship aspiring programs should like kind of leave no stone unturned when it comes to building your roster. And I don't know that Penn State does that. And like you almost want to laud them for like, valuing the commitments they make the guys when they recruit them out of high school. On the flip side of that, they have signed the most high school prospects among those 4 programs in the last 4 years. But maybe that is like, it's not bending the rules by any stretch, but maybe that's an area where Penn State could stand to be a little more aggressive as it chases a championship when it comes to roster building.
When I guess it was at the playoff game I was at last year when they beat SMU. He kind of leaned into like the guy, we have guys who stick around. We didn't build in the portal kind of stuff in like a way that felt old fashioned a little bit. That's like, and then the idea that like before the national semifinal last year with Penn State, Notre Dame was like, what was the number one story? Was that James Franklin made Marcus Freeman mad in the blah coaches news conference. And somehow that was a motivating factor for Notre Dame in that game, which is like still crazy to me, but also like, what are you doing? Like, how have you ever seen a coach sort of like stumble into that before? It's like you accidentally, you little brothered the other head coach when you were sort of like, I think trying to be nice or maybe trying to play mind games that blew up in your own face instead. But like, bro, that cannot happen. So there's like, it's just, there's still, I think, and I've kind of like defended James Franklin and tried to make the point that a lot of programs would like to be Penn State, which James Franklin likes to make that point as well. 99% of the programs would take this, but also there keep being things that you feel like you can point to where he is kind of holding them back.
Yeah, no, I think that's right. I don't know what his motivation was for the Marcus Freeman thing. But part of me does believe he thought he was going to like psych Marcus Freeman out by big brother or little brothering him. And it definitely blew up in his face.
Yeah.
I think there's like I don't know, maybe there's something for like James Franklin that sort of like needs to like kind of figure out who he is and who he wants to be in this sport. Like, not that like he's a winning coach by and large, and like that carries some cachet, no doubt about it. But sometimes I feel like he's caught a little in between of like, should I be like a serious championship contending steward of college football, or should I be a guy who like needles people like Dabo Swinney does sometimes? And I think you gotta pick a lane and stick with it and figure out which one works best for you. And I'm not entirely sure he's done that.
I feel like you could like see him struggle with that sometimes. And I think like we've had this conversation a lot. Like I think we like the word, right? Ruthlessness. Like, are you ruthless enough to like do this? And I think like Jim Harbaugh in the end, like there was no doubt about like he would do whatever it takes to win. And Kirby Smart does whatever it takes.
He said it at Big Ten Media Days, win or die trying.
Yes. And like Ryan Day, I think like Urban Meyer, no doubt about the ruthlessness. Nick Saban, no doubt about the ruthlessness. Like I think Ryan Day had to sort of learn that a little bit, but people last year said like, oh, he had like a different vibe in the playoff. Like I think maybe Does James but like, is Dabo ruthless, or Dabo has kind of his own thing? So like, does James Franklin need to be win or die trying, or can he be kind of like this other guy and succeed that way? I don't know, but I do think your point, pick a lane. I think he's at that point too.
Yeah. Well, and we'll see if he decides to pick one. Like he has an opportunity to set the tone now at the start of spring practice for how he wants to be perceived and how he wants his team to be perceived. And I'm interested to see if he takes that opportunity.
Yeah, so that's happening today on Tuesday. As Penn State is starting spring practice, and James Franklin's going to start talking about this stuff. So we will certainly monitor that. But we wanted to get out ahead of that and say well, this is kind of where we think they are. Let's see what happens the rest of spring to influence this Notre Dame, this Penn State conversation. Excuse me. All right, we have other things we want to talk about. We've gone super long. We're going to take our last break and run through these other things. Georgia, Michigan, Maryland next on KOTN. Doug Lesmerises, Bill Landis back on King to the North. Producer Mike passing along word that about 20 minutes ago, Stanford announced they had fired Troy Taylor. There was an investigation, I guess, into some of the way he was treating people. I think in the program, one answer there, right? There's one answer there now. One answer. Is that what everybody's saying?
So do you know, I guess supposedly who had the firing power in this situation?
No.
The announcement that Troy Taylor got fired came from general manager Andrew Luck.
Okay.
It is being positioned as Andrew Luck fired Troy Taylor, which I did not know was the dynamic between college GMs and college football head coaches. I guess so. I don't know. Why? I'd be a heck of a thing if he did it, but I didn't know that's where we were headed with the college football GM race, that those guys were going to have hiring and firing power for coaches. I just thought they were talking recruits.
I mean, we're all the way there, right? I mean, we're all the way there. I want Marcus Mariota to be the next Oregon coach. We want Eddie George. Make Andrew Luck the Stanford coach. What are we doing? Why not? What are you going to do instead? Make him the interim for a year and see how he likes it. Actually, Andrew, make yourself the interim for the year and see how you like it. Apparently, I don't know if there's anybody else doing it. The president of the university is like, man, I got a golf team and a swimming team to worry about. You do football. What else are you going to do there? Harbaugh back to Stanford. How about that? Maybe that. You want to float that? Floating that? So you were...
That'd be interesting. Yeah.
Christian McCaffrey retires to be the running backs coach at Stanford. Get the band back together. All right. Maryland athletic director Damon Evans. Georgia sleeper agent is gone. He's gone to be the athletic director at SMU. We've talked a lot about how Damon Evans, as the AD at Maryland last year, just went on the radio every week and was like, Mike Locksley not getting it done. And we were kind of like, I don't know. This is we get what's happening to Maryland football this year, but the AD doesn't get it. So Mike Locksley might be in trouble. This feels like a good thing for Mike Locksley. Kevin Willard, the basketball coach, basically shoved Damon Evans out the door with a news conference, which is fascinating. But there's also weird conversations here. But bottom line is Damon Evans, former Georgia dude, former Georgia AD, who was the Big Ten rep on the college football playoff committee they announced this year. And we talked about on here, sleeper agent, gone. And they're going to have to get somebody new from the Big Ten, maybe who actually wants to be in the South. Maybe Beth Getz from Iowa, somebody like that. Get them on the committee. That's one win. But also, this actually affects our view of Mike Locksley's standing at Maryland, does it not?
A little bit, yeah. It just seemed like if Damon Evans was going to continue as the AD there, that Mike Locksley probably wasn't going to be able to survive another losing season. And this doesn't guarantee that he will be, would be able to. But it gives him a far better chance, I think. Especially if whoever this new AD is can get aligned with Mike Locksley on where Maryland needs to go. In the end, it seemed like maybe Damon Evans had no alignment with its football coach or his head men's basketball coach.
Yeah, for real.
Which is not a great situation for the athletic department to be in. So that is incredibly important, obviously, to the success of any department. So maybe I don't like blessing in disguise, but maybe this could work out well for Maryland to get pointed back in a better direction.
The thing is, we talked about it on the recruiting show we did a couple of weeks ago. It's like Maryland has a 5-star. Maryland might get 2 of the best 5 players in the country. They have one locked in, and they're in hot pursuit of another one, both local. And it's like Loxley, Maryland could be on the verge. They got a big time local quarterback in last year's class. Like they could be on the verge of like maybe taking a next step, and they just had like a step back year in between. And I think that probably requires an AD with a little patience here. Like this would not be the time to me to get impatient with Maryland football. But the other part of this is that this has continued the basketball football money conversation. There are all Power 4 teams, all Power 4 football teams in the men's basketball Sweet 16 for like the first time ever. All that anybody is talking about with the rev share that is coming, where schools are going to play payers directly, is the idea that schools without big time football programs might have an advantage in paying basketball players if basketball is like your number one sport at your school. But at the moment, Landis, what is happening right now is the opposite of that. There's no Villanovas, there's no Gonzagas, there's no St. John's, there's none of those. It's all SEC, Big 12, Big 10, and one ACC school. Kevin Willard, the Maryland basketball coach, was kind of mad that he felt like maybe Damon Evans had not been supporting Maryland basketball enough. This is going to be an ongoing conversation, but it's just a little, it's interesting to me. It felt like at the heart of this Damon Evans thing, and Kevin Willard made it very public, and also that the thing that everybody thinks might happen for the moment and the last year before rev share, the opposite has happened. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what to make of it, but I think it's weird.
It is weird. I don't know what to make of it either. I guess I would say, like, as someone who's not an expert in big or college basketball, like, I would expect the Big East, which is largely, if not predominantly, a conference that doesn't have FBS football. Like, they'll be back in it in a way that will like upset this and not keep it from happening routinely. But it is odd. Like, part of it's a reflection of the transfer portal, obviously. But I also think it could just be like a weird time where that converged with like the Big East being a bit down this year in basketball that led us to this.
Yeah. So it's like it's certainly something to watch. And it's one of those, like, the money, how you decide to share the school money internally. There's still the outside NIL stuff. And it feels like a lot of schools probably are, if you play big time football, you're going to give most of your money to football, but then you're going to need the NIL to really prop up all the other sports, right? Including men's and women's basketball. So it's just going to be a financial thing that, like, frankly, whatever, like, we'll see what happens on the courts and on the fields. Like, this is not a financial show, but it's just that this was like the first year this happened. It's a football dominated basketball men's Sweet 16, right at the edge of the moment where people think football powers will be at a disadvantage. So it might be the last gasp, but we'll see. We got to talk about Michigan. Former Michigan assistant Matt Weiss was indicted last week. He pled not guilty in court on Monday to this federal indictment of just this ridiculous stuff of creeping on college athletes by breaking into computer servers to get information about them. And it is the allegations that the feds put out. It's long. It's horrible. It dates back to before he was at Michigan. It's while he was working for the Baltimore Ravens, and then continued while he was at the University of Michigan. And then the other part of this that really matters, the idea that he was working as a position coach at the University of Michigan and doing these things, really matters. The idea that the feds are investigating something, and once the feds get involved, that's where stuff pops, because now it's out of your control. It's not the NCAA that doesn't have subpoena power being like, you've got to turn yourself in. It's like the feds are on you. You never know what the fallout can be from that kind of thing. So we do not then, I think, have a result of what any more like fallout could be from this for the University of Michigan at the athletic department and the football program. But the other part of this is 2 of the athletes who had this done to them on Monday filed a civil suit, not just against Weiss, but also against the university. So now this becomes a thing where from the outside, it seems like, well, as soon as Michigan like found out he was like accessing these computer systems in a way that he shouldn't, they fired him. but it doesn't mean they're off the hook here for stuff. Like both, primarily maybe from a civil standpoint, but then also from an NCAA standpoint. Connor Stallions is football stuff. This is real life stuff. The allegations are horrendous, and it complicates everything around Michigan football right now. And while I was not I was not waiting for another shoe to drop in the Connor Stallions thing from the NCAA, when the feds are running the show here, and if the NCAA has been waiting for the feds to make the official indictment, you don't know what's going to happen. And I think at this point, I have no idea what the fallout may or may not be for Michigan football.
Yeah, I don't know that either. I don't necessarily consider this to be like directly linked in any way with the Connor Stallion stuff, as far as I know. But it's just like at the very least, it's another thing, not to minimize it in any way, that you sort of like throw on the pile of like what the heck was going on at Michigan for the last like 3 or 4 years, right? On the field and off the field. There's just a lot to get at there as you're trying to figure out what exactly the result of all this should be. So I wouldn't even try to guess what that might be, other than to say like doesn't feel like a particularly comfortable position for Michigan to be in right now.
Yeah, and that it's like the university is named in the civil suit beyond just the individual fired former coach becomes a part of this. But I do think, like with the history of the NCAA, like piles matter.
Yeah.
So like that there was like the hamburger stuff, which was like a shorthand, but it's basically like Michigan was like breaking recruiting rules during COVID when everybody was just trying to figure out how the world was supposed to work. And like, if you weren't listening to rules there, that's the thing. You can minimize it and call it a hamburger thing, but there was that. And then there's the Stallions allegations, and more than allegations, that they were doing at least something. And then now on top of this, were you not monitoring an employee who was doing these terrible things is another thing. The piles matter. And so it's like one after another. There's the federal, this guy's could wind up, if he's found guilty of this, he's going to wind up in jail. So that's a separate thing. And it's terrible for all the students and the athletes who were affected by this and had their privacy potentially invaded by this guy. But it could matter for Michigan football because piles matter. And so I'm not going to pretend that we know what's going to happen. But to me, it sort of reignites. Not that the Stallion stuff was over, but even if it's not connected, it is connected.
Yeah,
in terms of being on the pile.
Definitely, and certainly like in all the conversations we have about like court of public opinion, which I think is, largely kind of settled what side of that you're on. But like this would strengthen the side of if you think like Michigan had some serious issues.
Yep.
But I'd also like if you weren't like on that extreme, waiting for like the hammer to fall on Michigan, whatever you think that might be in your head, I could see why this might push you more in that direction. Just because if it's more of just like a holistic look of what was happening there, from whatever 2021 through 2023, this is part of it. Like how much of a part of it should it be? I don't know. I wouldn't pretend to know, but you can't ignore it either.
No, and that's been kind of my thing of like, it may just wind up in the court of public opinion, because I didn't think that the NCAA in the end, with just on the Stallion stuff, was going to like do stuff that satisfied the people who thought Michigan did terrible things. But I think the court of public opinion matters. And again, when we look back on this Harbaugh era that finishes with the greatest season in Michigan football history, but there's a lot of stuff around it now that is just, it's in the first paragraph of the story of this Michigan football team, and it hasn't fully been written yet. So like we certainly don't want to be dismissive of it, but if people have thought that I've been dismissive of Stallions things in the past, it's, I think, primarily fueled by like, I just don't know that they're going to like get hammered for it. But like this, I mean, this is just having like lived through and having covered firsthand all the tattoo stuff with Ohio State. That was the feds, man. And like once the feds, because they start looking into stuff and then they find stuff that's connected to the thing they're not even but it's just so different because the NCAA is so weak on what they can like make you do. The feds will throw you in jail, man. But it's not that they're going to throw anybody, while they're throwing you in jail, they might find other things that are of interest to the NCAA. And that's just like, this is the reality of this situation.
Right.
All right. The last thing we didn't talk about the other day, it had come out, but it's just, there's two more players with driving issues at Georgia. And like, it's one of those, I don't even know how to talk about it anymore, Landis, because it's now at least 10 arrests for driving violations, for speeding violations, for reckless driving, whatever, since 2023. We all know the tragic death of a Georgia football player that was part of one of those. And now here we have two more. One guy was speeding and another guy like drove into a house, and it's just like, they have been suspended. Kirby Smart did suspend them, but it still feels like he thinks, I don't know what else to do. And then it still keeps happening. And then to me, it's just like, well, then you're a failure. And then it's just like on us, the college football community, to decide how much we care. And I still think they have they've already been shown that these things have put the community at risk. They cost somebody his life and other people. Like, I don't want to put on the dog mentality hat because I don't want to make light of it. But it's just shocking to me that it continues. And it makes me just think that, like, Kirby Smart, it just affects my view of Kirby Smart so much when I think he really, as a football coach and like getting a team ready for a Saturday afternoon, is pretty darn good at that. I just could not have less respect for the way he handles everything else. And I think that's like, for a guy with one of two guys in the sport with 2 national championships who are active, that he's such a failure at that, I just think is like a gigantic story that feels like it's not as big of a story as it should be.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think part of that might be, well, like, he suspended them. What's he supposed to do? Like, and I got like, I don't know, instill a culture of accountability in your program that clearly doesn't exist, I guess, would be my answer to that. Which, hasn't happened. I don't want to necessarily say that it's for lack of trying, but perhaps Kirby Smart's not trying as hard as he should be, or the University of Georgia is not trying as hard as it should be, or being more discerning about the people that it's bringing into the program. I don't know. There's a lot to get into there. I'm like you. I don't know what else to say about it at this point, other than to like mark its seriousness, and like we're well past the point of like putting on the dog mentality hat. I think making jokes of it, right? Like, it's long been a very serious issue that I don't know why it hasn't been addressed. I wish that it would be. But I don't know that whatever like the most extreme response to that would be to try to actually curtail it. I'm not entirely sure what it would be, but I also don't think that Kirby Smart would ever do it, because then you're talking about it being detrimental to Georgia's football success.
And then the thing, and I am not the foremost expert on it, but it's like, a part of it is like, again, are you only recruiting like the most talented football players no matter what? And plenty of programs and coaches go about it that way. But do you have like zero consideration for like how you think these guys are as people? And that you just like, is it the culture, and you're turning the kids who come into these people who are dangers on the roadways? Are you bringing in the type of people who are very susceptible to becoming danger on the road? Like, why? And it's not like this everywhere. So why is it like it there? So I don't know. Levi says, when Kirby makes public remarks about it where it seems like he seems authentic in his condemnation of these actions, it will be the first time. Like, I agree with that. He says stuff, but it's like, yeah. So it is real life, but here we are. We're talking about the 2 programs who won 3 straight national titles in 2021, 2022, and 2023. And we're like asking, like, what's up with the culture? What was up with the culture? What's up with the culture at Georgia? What was up with the culture at Michigan under Jim Harbaugh? And it's like really unfortunate for this sport, because it's not new. It is not new. It is not new. We certainly will not pretend that it is new, whether it was, stuff at Ohio State or stuff at Florida or stuff at, plenty of programs. We understand that it is not new. And I also am not, there are things that are much more real life kind of things. And there are things that are just like NCAA rule things, but it's like, it's always, it sucks a little, it takes a little wind out of our sails, I think, Landis, when we're talking about the teams who play the best ball. And then we are also having these conversations at the highest level of the sport. And maybe it'll never end. but it's still always, I think it always like depresses me a little bit when the best teams are having major problems.
Yeah, and no, I think taking away that of the sales is right. Did you see the comment from John about your boy Paste?
Oh, yeah. Oh, our John says Josh Pace posted a 45-minute interview with Kirby. Guess if he asked him once about this stuff. I guess the answer is no. Yeah, because probably if like he wouldn't have gotten the interview. I don't know. I mean, that's maybe more about Georgia, but like, yeah, sure. I don't know. So that's not a great. I don't have answers, but it's. We like talking ball, but also this stuff really matters. So it really matters. All right, we'll be back on Wednesday. Sorry, we did a 2-hour show, but we can't help it. There was too much going on. We couldn't stop talking about James Franklin. But we could probably take a break on James Franklin for a while now, right?
We covered a lot of ground. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks as always to our producer, Mike Yerstowski. Thanks to you guys for being here live in the YouTube chat. Thanks for listening back on podcast. Thanks for watching back on YouTube. And we will see you on Wednesday. For now, he's Bill Landis. I'm Doug Lesmerises, and that was Kings of the North.